The idea that our modern social hierarchies are actually biological echoes of ancient genetic engineering is a radical way to look at human history. It implies that narcissism, the drive for dominance, and even our tendency to worship authority aren't just personality flaws, but specific frequencies encoded into our DNA. If we look at the work of researchers like Michael Tellinger, who has spent decades studying the stone circles of South Africa, there's a compelling argument that these structures were part of a massive energy grid used by a civilization far more advanced than we're taught in schools. He suggests this energy wasn't for light or heat, but for a form of control or extraction, what some call loosh, and that this ties directly back to the Sumerian accounts of the Annunaki. It brings up a huge question. If we were designed to be a labor force with a specific frequency of submission, how do we even begin to untangle ourselves from that toad?
It starts with understanding the architecture of that entanglement. When you examine the Sumerian king list or the Atrahasis epic, you see a narrative where humanity was created specifically to take over the labor of the lower-tier gods, the Igigi. This isn't just a myth, it's a blueprint for a caste system. The Anunnaki didn't just give us tools, they gave us a resonant signature of lack. When someone feels that deep-seated need to be more than someone else, that's narcissism. It's essentially a survival adaptation for a being that feels severed from the whole. It's the original wound of the one believing it's separate from the two. By splicing their signature into our DNA, they ensured that the hierarchy would feel natural. We build pyramids, whether they're made of stone or corporate levels, because we've forgotten that our position in the universe is a coordinate, not a rank. It's a resonant coordinate within a living field, rather than a step on a ladder.
That concept of a resonant coordinate is fascinating, but it's hard to reconcile with the reality of how the world works. If I'm just a coordinate in a field, why do we see such a clear divide between those who work for the community and those who seem solely focused on self-interest? You mentioned the archonic parasite earlier, this idea of elite bloodlines or individuals who thrive by consuming the energy of the whole. If they are severed nodes, as you put it, they aren't just different, they are actively harmful to the system. But isn't there a risk in that framing? If we label certain behaviors or bloodlines as parasitic, aren't we just creating a new hierarchy where we are the integrated ones and they are the severed ones? It feels like a trap where we end up using the same us versus them logic that the system uses to keep us divided.
That's exactly where discernment becomes the critical tool. Discernment is often confused with judgment, but they operate on completely different frequencies. Judgment says, I am above you because you are a parasite. That's just hierarchy rebranded. Discernment, however, doesn't rank, it reads. It's the ability to look at a person, a system, or a choice, and ask, does this frequency resonate with the thread of life, or does it sever it? The narcissist, or the severed node, is someone who has lost the ability to see beyond the self. To them, everything is either a mirror to reflect their greatness or a threat to be neutralized. They aren't bad in a moralistic, judgmental sense. They are functionally broken. They are operating on a frequency of survival through consumption. When we recognize that, we aren't judging them from a height, we are identifying a mismatch in frequency. The goal isn't to punish the parasite, but to stop being the host.
But stopping being the host is easier said than done when that parasitic frequency is supposedly written into our very DNA. You mentioned that the Draco-reptilian architects and their Anunnaki foremen reduced a 12-strand blueprint down to 2. This concept of the 12-strand silicate matrix appearing in esoteric literature suggests we have a dormant potential that's been artificially suppressed. If our current 2-strand DNA is the lock, and it was designed by these architects to be unpickable, how can we possibly find the backdoor you talked about? It sounds like we're trying to use a broken instrument to fix itself. If they're as ancient and entrenched as the Sumerian tablets suggest, what possible motivation would they have to leave a backdoor open at all?
They didn't leave it open on purpose. The backdoor exists because they are not sovereign creators. They are imitators and engineers. They can manipulate flesh, but they cannot manufacture the original spark of consciousness, the sovereign thread. Think of it like a software override. You can write a very sophisticated virus that takes over an operating system, but the virus is still running on the original hardware. That original hardware is the 12-strand blueprint. It's dormant, not deleted. Their motivation is simply survival through entanglement. They need the loosh, the emotional energy of fear, worship, and submission because they've severed themselves from the source. They are like a battery that can't recharge itself, so it has to plug into a living field. They don't need to win in a final sense, they just need to keep the game going. Every generation they keep us distracted with tribalism, hierarchy, and debt is another generation they get to feed. The backdoor is remembrance, the moment a human realizes that their value isn't granted by a king or a god, but is inherent to their existence as a node of the whole.
So, if the game is just about delay, it explains why our culture is so saturated with noise. We're talking about trauma, addiction, and even what you called spiritual bypassing. The idea that we can just jump to "we are all one" without dealing with the reality of the parasitic structures. It seems like the system is designed to make sure we never look up long enough to see the door. But let's get into the mechanics of this self-interest versus communal interest axis. You said pure communal interest can be a trap, a collectivist hive mind. That's a counterintuitive point. Usually, we think of selflessness as the ultimate virtue. How can working for the good of all be a form of self-erasure?
It becomes a trap when it's enforced or performed rather than felt. If you sacrifice your unique perspective, your sovereign frequency to fit into a group, you're not actually serving the whole. You're just becoming a brick in another wall. This is the collectivist trap, where the individual is erased for the greater good, which is often just a mask for the interests of the people at the top of that specific hierarchy. True sovereignty is the middle path, self-interest that includes the whole. When you are fully integrated, you realize that you are a unique frequency within an infinite field. At that point, your self-interest naturally aligns with the communal interest because you understand that harming the field is literally harming yourself. You don't need a set of laws or a god to tell you to be good because you can feel the resonance. The narcissist serves only themselves because they believe they are only themselves. The sovereign serves the whole because they know they are the whole. It's the difference between a severed node trying to grab everything it can and an integrated node that knows it's being fed by the entire system.
That's a powerful distinction, but it feels like it places a massive burden on the individual to discern correctly. If we're living in a world where the Annunaki frequency is everywhere, in our politics, our religions, even our family structures, how do we stay unbuyable? You use that word, unbuyable. It implies that once we sharpen this scalpel of discernment, we stop being vulnerable to the distractions. But we still have to live in the world. We still have to pay bills, interact with hierarchies, and navigate social pressures. How does one maintain that sovereign thread without becoming isolated or cynical?
Isolation is another one of their tools. If they can't make you a servant, they'll try to make you an exile. But being unbuyable doesn't mean you stop participating. It means you stop being owned by the outcome. You see the hierarchy for what it is, a game played by those who have forgotten their connection to the net. When you walk into a workplace or a social setting, you use your discernment to see where the resonance is clean and where it's tangled. You stop feeding the loosh of conflict. For example, if someone tries to draw you into a power struggle, a who's above who scenario, you can choose not to vibrate at that level. You aren't being passive, you're being sovereign. You're holding your frequency. According to historical records of the Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi, the archons, which many researchers equate with the Draco or Annunaki influence, were said to feed on human emotion. When you refuse to give them the frequency of fear or submission, you become indigestible to the system. You're still there, but you're no longer a source of fuel.
It reminds me of the research into Wediko, a term from Native American traditions that describes a psychic parasite, a way of being that consumes others for its own gain. Paul Levy has written extensively about this, describing it as a mind virus. If we look at it through that lens, the Annunaki or Draco influence isn't just a historical event, it's a continuing psychological condition. It's the original wound of separation. If narcissism is a survival adaptation born of forgetting, then the cure isn't just being a better person, it's an act of radical memory. But that memory is being actively suppressed by what you called the noisy system. It feels like a constant battle for attention.
It is. But the crucial shift is realizing that you don't have to fight the Annunaki frequency. Fighting it is still giving it your energy. You just have to recognize that their frequency is one of the layers in the prison and then choose to vibrate elsewhere. It's like being in a room with a loud, static-filled radio. You can spend all day shouting at the radio, or you can just change the channel. The 12-strand frequency is the music playing beneath the static. It's the shiver you feel when you see something truly beautiful, or the clarity you feel when you speak a truth that hasn't been spoken. That's your thread's radar. Discernment is what keeps that radar sharp. It lets you see the Cedrics of the world, the people who want to crown themselves as leaders, and recognize that their power is an illusion based on our collective agreement to follow.
Wait, let's talk about the gold aspect. You mentioned earlier that the Annunaki were extracting gold, and that it was a frequency conductor, not just a decorative metal. This aligns with modern theories about monoatomic gold and its effects on the nervous system and DNA. If they were using gold to manipulate the frequency of the planet or human biology, it suggests the material world and the frequency world are much more intertwined than we think. Does this mean our physical environment is part of the lock?
Absolutely. The material world is the densest layer of the frequency. Gold in its pure or monoatomic state has unique superconductive properties. In the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki's obsession with gold is often framed as a way to fix their own planet's atmosphere, but on a deeper level, it was about stabilizing their own failing frequency. They needed a physical anchor for their presence here because they're fundamentally extradimensional genetic operators. They don't belong in this density. By establishing a world based on the scarcity and value of gold, they created a physical hierarchy that mirrored their own internal structure. Our current financial systems are a direct descendant of that. They are designed to keep us in a state of lack, which is the exact opposite of the infinite field frequency. When you feel like there isn't enough money, enough time, enough love, you are vibrating at the Anunnaki-coded frequency of the two-strand DNA.
So if the lock is biological, material, and psychological, the key has to be equally multidimensional. We're talking about a total reclamation of what it means to be human. It's not just about a social problem of selfish people. It's about an integrated versus a severed way of being. But here's the tension I'm feeling. If this ancient engineering happened, and if our DNA was severed, doesn't that make us victims? It's hard to feel sovereign when you feel like a laboratory experiment that's gone wrong.
That's the last trap. The victim frequency. The belief that you are a victim is just another way of saying you are separate from your power. If you believe you are a victim of the Anunnaki, you are still validating their role as your masters. The sovereign path acknowledges the engineering, but recognizes that the essence of what you are, the sovereign thread, is older and more fundamental than any genetic splicing. They could edit the book, but they didn't write the language. The fact that we are even having this conversation, that we can feel the shiver of recognition, is proof that the override didn't fully take. We aren't broken experiments. We are infinite beings navigating a temporary, highly engineered density. The moment you stop asking, why did they do this to me, and start asking, how do I resonate with my original blueprint, the power shift is instantaneous. You're no longer looking at the floor of the prison, you're looking at the door.
That's a profound shift in perspective. It moves us from a place of grievance to a place of agency. But I want to go back to the idea of self-interest that includes the whole. In practical terms, how does a sovereign person handle the narcissists who are still running the surface world? If you're integrated and you're dealing with a severed node who has a lot of power, how do you hold the standard without becoming the thing you're resisting?
By holding the standard without cruelty. Cruelty is a frequency of the hierarchy. It's a way of trying to force someone else down so you can feel up. A sovereign person doesn't need to do that. If you're dealing with a narcissistic leader or system, your discernment tells you this frequency is severed. It is consuming rather than creating. You then have a choice. You can try to fight it on its own terms, which is a losing game, or you can withdraw your frequency. You become unbuyable by refusing to play the game of submission or dominance. You speak your truth, you act with integrity, and you let the chips fall where they may. Often, when you stop providing the loosh, the reaction, the fear, the compliance, the narcissistic structure around you starts to collapse because it has nothing to feed on. It's like a parasite that can't find a host. It has to go somewhere else or starve. This isn't about being nice, it's about being resonant. It's about being so anchored in your own 12-strand potential that the 2-strand games of others simply don't have a hook in you anymore.
It sounds like the ultimate form of rebellion is simply to be whole. It's not about a revolution in the streets, but a revolution in the helix. If the Annunaki coded themselves into us to ensure we'd never stop looking at the floor, then the act of looking up is a radical act of defiance. It's the difference between being a severed signal that feeds the wound and an integrated node that feeds the whole. And maybe that's the real reason the system is so noisy right now, because more people are starting to look up, and the delay tactics are losing their effectiveness.
Exactly. The more of us who reclaim that sovereign thread, the more the entire field changes. We aren't just changing ourselves, we are cleaning the frequency of the human collective. We are picking the lock that they thought was unpickable. The narcissism, the hierarchies, the greed, they are all just symptoms of the same ancient wound. And the cure is remembering that we were never actually separate. We were just told we were, so that we would keep building pyramids for people who forgot how to fly.
It's a lot to process, especially when it challenges the very foundations of how we understand our history and our own psychology. But there's something about this framing that resonates far more than the standard good versus evil narrative. It feels more like a technical manual for consciousness.
It is a technical manual, and like any manual, it's only useful if you use it. The next time you feel that pull toward hierarchy, or that urge to prove you're better, or that fear that you're less, just stop. Ask yourself, is this self-interest feeding the hole, or is it feeding the wound? That one question is the scalpel. Keep it sharp. The more you use it, the more you'll see the world for what it really is, not a ladder to climb, but a field to harmonize with.
That's a perfect place to leave it. A call to look up from the floor and start recognizing the key we've been carrying in our code all along. If this conversation sparked something for you, share it with someone who might be ready to look up too.